Welcome to the Divorce Survival Guide podcast, where we have open and honest conversations about co-parenting, separation, divorce, and the hardest question of all, should you stay or should you go? I'm Kate Anthony, your divorce survival guide, and I'm here to help you navigate some of the roughest waters you've ever swum in and answer some of your toughest questions. I've been to hell and back, and now it's my mission in life to help you get to the other side of this process with your sanity and your heart intact.
Hey everyone, welcome back. So I just want to thank everybody for your responses to the survey that I included in the little bonus episode that I did this week about the closing of the Facebook group. You guys had a lot of great feedback and things to say and suggestions and percolating all of this. Unfortunately, most of your suggestions were things that we have done in the past, or like turning on post approval. We did that. It literally requires someone to sit there 24/7 to do that because it did not slow down the number of posts. So, all of the suggestions that you made, not all of them, but many of them we were implementing or had implemented. So anyway, again, I appreciate all of your suggestions and, mostly I appreciate your words of support and love and understanding for having made the decision that I did. I really appreciate it. That's all. So moving on to today's episode, pathological love relationships. Dr. Sarah Schewitz returns to the show today, and she helps us understand what a pathological love relationship is, how to know if you're in one, and why these types of relationships can be so devastating. And then the good news, what's necessary to recover and heal. Lots of really great stuff in this episode. I love Dr. Sarah. She's just so incredibly smart and interesting and doing great things in the world. She's a licensed psychologist specializing in love and relationships, and she's the founder of the successful online psychology practice Couples Learn, which was named by Forbes Health as one of the top 3 online marriage counseling services in 2023. So if you're kind of in that place where you're really still working on things and you're looking for a good couples therapist, head over to Couples Learn, because she's kind of cornered the market on how to do this online. So if you're having trouble finding somebody in your area, I bet Dr. Sarah has someone that you might be able to work with. Without further ado, here's my conversation on pathological love relationships with Dr. Sarah Schewitz. Dr. Sarah Schewitz, thank you so much for coming back. It has been, as we were just talking about before we hit record, it's been a pandemic since we spoke.
Yep, sure has.
And, we follow each other on social media. We're friends on Facebook, all of the things. Tell everyone what you've been up to besides having moved away from Los Angeles.
I did. I moved to Portland, Maine, where it's very laid back and lovely. And though you guys won't be able to see it, I'm sitting in the midst of nature in my sunroom surrounded by trees, and it's very peaceful. I loved West Hollywood while I was there and LA while I was there, but this is a nice change of pace.
It is so different. It is so different. Yeah. I'm thrilled for you. I'm jealous. I'm thrilled for you.
But yeah, what I've been up to is really what I've always been up to, which is helping individuals and couples heal attachment trauma. And I'm really passionate about breaking generational trauma patterns so that we can just have healthier people in general. And I've created a whole practice around that. And I have employees who are also aligned with that mission. And we just kind of do the work of helping people heal so that we can have a healthier society one day.
I love it. I love it. It's so funny. Like whenever we talk about this kind of stuff, right? And like, I think about healing attachment trauma and generational trauma and all of that stuff. And I feel like, oh my God, we're coming so far, right? We're coming so far. Last night, my ex-husband's other son, he's 12-year-old. And my ex called me and he was like, so he just told me that he has anxiety. And I was like, in what world does a 12-year-old understand what's happening to them, have the tools to name it, go to their parent and say, hey, this is what's happening? Like, can you imagine at 12?
No, I mean, I had, looking back retrospectively,
sure.
I had enormous anxiety.
But did we know it?
No idea.
And so I do think about like, oh my God, I get so hopeful for all of the healing that we're doing as a society, as the collective. And then I also look at the absolute shit show of our society and the collective. And I'm like, what the fuck is happening?
I know. The
and
dichotomy is so challenging and confusing.
Yeah. And I also think it's like, this is systems theory, right? Like we're changing, we're bumping up against some really big stuff and it's getting louder and louder. But when you said that, when you're like, wanting to have like a healthier society, I was like, yeah, but wait a minute, it's getting worse.
In some ways, like you said, in some ways it is. And in other ways, people are waking up and paying so much more attention to mental health, which really is such a core part of having a healthier society.
And how do you see that right now in your practice? I mean, because you have an online practice, you have therapists that work for you, you've created this like amazing practice. And are you seeing this like all over the country? Because you kind of have a unique lens as a therapist in that way.
So we specialize mostly in relationships, love and relationships. And what we see nowadays is a lot of premarital couples coming to couples therapy. I know, right?
Amen.
And it used to be, right.
Yes.
It used to be that people waited an average of 6 years, and this might still be true in the research across the nation, but we are definitely seeing a trend. So a lot of people, it used to be they waited 6 years from the time they had any issues to the time they got help. By then they are so resentful and so far gone, and they kind of hate each other in many instances that it's very hard to make any headway in couples therapy. And what I'm seeing over and over again is young couples in their 20s and 30s who are thinking about getting married and wanting to have the tools to create a healthy marriage.
I think that's the key too, in their 20s and 30s, right? Mm-hmm. These like millennials and Gen Z, they've grown up around, like they've had us for parents. I say us, Gen X. Mm-hmm. And, they're like, yo, we're fucked up.
Yeah.
And like all the parents got divorced, right? And so listen, nothing would make me happier than being put out of business. Really. I don't know what I'd do with my life, but I'd be thrilled. I love that. I love that they're doing premarital counseling and like the real deal. They're not going to like do like check the box at church. They're doing like counseling.
Yeah. And a lot of them, I mean, I met with 2 new couples today who both partners are in individual therapy, have done individual attachment trauma work. They understand how their childhood wounds are influencing their relationships. And I'm like, you guys are amazing. This is the future. It's so exciting to see because I just, we won't even be alive to see the trickle down effect, honestly, but 100, 200 years from now, people are going to be so much healthier and their attachment is going to be so much more secure.
It's so incredible to watch. I love that. I love, love, love it. It makes me so happy. I look at my son and his girlfriend and they're 18, 19, and they're like, it's like she's going off to Europe for 3 months. So he's like, I don't know if we're going to stay together while she's in Europe, but and like there's zero, she's going to Europe. What am I going to do? And she's going to be with somebody else. It's like they broke up for a while. They both like had, other things. They slept with other people. They got back together. Nobody cared. It wasn't a thing. And I'm like, how? I think of myself at that age and I'm like, how? It's amazing.
It
It's
really
amazing. They're
is.
so much healthier than we were. Ugh, I love it.
Yeah. But that's probably a testament to you and the work that you're doing in large part as well, and the model that you're setting for them.
I think so. And her mom's a therapist and a healer and like all of the things. And so I think having us as moms has certainly given them a lot more access to, what it is to be in a healthy relationship, how to, and to not have serious anxious attachment. Like it's crazy. It's like
avoidant.
Or avoidant. Yeah. It's so foreign to me that these kids are so secure. But on the flip side, we want to talk today about pathological love relationships. I mean, I read those 3 words and I was like, oh, juicy. I am sick and twisted. Tell me, what is a pathological love relationship? What does that mean?
There are kind of 4 identifiers of a pathological love relationship. And this is just kind of a research-driven name for being in a relationship with someone who has a cluster B personality disorder. And those are narcissistic personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, and borderline personality disorder. So those are the cluster B. They all have similar traits. They're also called the dramatic and erratic personality disorders. And so the first identifier of a pathological love relationship, which we'll just call PLR for ease of conversation, is that at least one person has a cluster B personality disorder. The second is that the relationship has dramatic and erratic dynamics, which kind of goes along with the first part.
So this is like the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. This is like the peaks and valleys are so disparate.
Yes.
Right? They're like, yep.
As have I. The third identifier is that the survivor or target or victim, the person who usually isn't the one with the personality disorder, they actually have special super traits in their personality that make them inherently susceptible to being targeted. Fourth is that the survivor has trauma symptoms in the aftermath of leaving the relationship. So these are serious traumatic experiences that happen in PLRs.
So the first one is the cluster B, right?
Yep. One of those personality disorders.
And like, okay, let's say you're in this, right? And there's not been a diagnosis. No, like how do you know? How do you know that like you're not the problem, or that, you don't have a cluster, like, because often I think in these dynamics, right, the cluster B person will convince you that you're actually the one with the cluster B problem, right? So how do you make sense of that?
Well, if you find yourself Googling your partner's behavior, that's number one kind of a red flag that you might be getting really confused and disoriented because of this manipulation and gaslighting that you're experiencing, and you're just trying to go anywhere for some answers that make sense.
Yeah.
But there's traits, right? Every personality disorder is a little different, but you'll notice they're pretty selfish or self-absorbed. They might have a really grandiose sense of self where they think they're amazing. Or the flip side with a covert narcissist is they're like always a victim, and the woe is me, and I just need so much help and assistance, and everyone screws me over. Right. So that's even hard because it could be both.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. They kind of masquerade as like, sometimes they masquerade as like, they're actually there to help you too. Right. There's like a
hero type complex there, savior complex.
Right. Yep. Okay.
They are pretty bad at respecting boundaries, don't like them, don't want to have them. They may be controlling, manipulative, gaslighting. They try to confuse you. That's the core of gaslighting, is there's a real clear intention that they want to throw you off so that you stop trusting your own judgment and think you're the narcissist or you're the cluster B. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah.
They're not great at regulating their emotions usually. Just a lot of really challenging dynamics in a relationship that cause this erratic, dramatic relationship.
Right. And you feel like, I always go for, when I'm trying to explain like a dynamic of relationships, I try to focus on like, how does it feel to be in that relationship? Because I think that's almost more identifiable than like, what does the relationship look like? Because then they're like, well, it's not quite like that, right? It doesn't quite look like that. But what about, And so it's like, well, okay, how do you feel? Do you feel like you're always confused? Do you feel like you're bending yourself into pretzels, or like you're always the one to blame, or like, I don't know. So what are some other feelings that someone might experience?
I think the biggest one is that confusion. We get what's called cognitive dissonance, where it's like the Jekyll and Hyde kind of, he's all good or he's all bad. And the things that they're doing just don't make sense to you. And you start to not trust yourself.
Yeah. And you start to
That's
think the problem. Yeah.
Yeah. And you start to think you're crazy. So that is definitely the biggest one to look for. But also, if you feel less confident, you start to feel broken down.
Yeah.
That's a big one.
Yes. Right. Like you're just, the darkness is kind of overcoming you in a sense.
If you stop talking to your friends and family about your relationship because you think they're going to judge your partner or judge you for staying, that's a pretty big red flag. You might be in an unhealthy relationship and need to take a look at that.
If there's anything that's driving a wedge between you and your family, whether it's that you don't want to, you're scared to talk to them, or that your partner is somehow driving the wedge, that's a really big red flag. We're going to take a quick break and we're going to come back and we're going to talk a little bit more about these 4 traits or symptoms or whatever.
Super traits.
Super traits. Okay, we are back. Okay, super traits. So the person who is in the relationship with the cluster B person exhibits super traits. What are super traits?
So there is the Big 5 personality inventory, and it's a set of 5 personality traits. And so in a lot of theories, we think that people who end up with narcissistic personality disorder folks or addicts or things like that, that they fit this like prototypical codependent prototype. They're helpless, they're needy, they may not be able to support themselves in some way, they just tolerate all kinds of levels of abuse, right? Like this is the older kind of model of who ends up in these relationships. What has been found through new research is that there's the nurture component. Like I had a bad childhood, so abuse was normalized, so I ended up in an abusive relationship. But there's also a nature component that you tend to be higher on agreeableness and conscientiousness. And these traits, when further broken down, have all these different facets to them that impact how the victim shows up. So like agreeableness, those folks tend to be higher on trust, higher on tolerance of bullshit. They are more giving, they're more cooperative, they are more straightforward. And actually, you would think, okay, but so then they're going to tell it like it is, but they expect that others are too, because they're trusting, they see this.
Right.
Yeah.
This is that. So that's the catch-22 where you think that everybody functions the way that you do. And yet actually these are very unique in a sense to these people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yes. Relating. Okay.
And then
what's the next?
So conscientiousness, pulling up some notes on this, because it is like there's so much to remember and to kind of think about with this. But people who are conscientious have a general healthy sense of self-acceptance, but they're made to feel guilty very easily. And because they're good people, they're conscientious people, they care about their impact on others. Right. So they're kind of easy to manipulate in that sense because they feel bad and they feel like they've done something wrong. They don't want to do something wrong. They're like rule followers.
Right. Okay.
And they're also not impulsive typically, which works against them because they'll try harder before leaving rather than impulsively being like, this is weird behavior, I'm out of here.
Out. Yeah.
They'll stick around longer because they're conscientious.
Okay. And we also, I think the conscientiousness, and tell me if I'm wrong, it feels like the conscientiousness also provides us with the capacity to like have more compassion for them and their trauma, right? And it's like, well, I can't leave him because he's actually only acting in this way because of his trauma. And so, I can't leave him.
Exactly. Yeah. And they're problem solvers. So they're like, I know how to fix him. I'm going to find all the answers in my conscientious way. I'm going to search the internet and I'm going to give it to him. And he's unknowingly to them manipulating them by being like, oh, this is so great that you found this. I'm definitely going to work on this thing.
Right.
Yeah. And these conscientious folks have really high willpower. So they just don't quit that easily.
Feeling very attacked right now, Sarah. Dr. Sarah is calling me out. Go on.
What's so cool though? This is a blessing and a curse because yes, these folks, and I'm one of them, I can completely relate to feeling called out. When I learned this in a training, I was like, I feel so attacked and so seen at the same time.
Right. Exactly.
But these things also make you an incredible partner for the right person. Yeah. Like the best type of partner.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Still waiting.
So yeah, those are the two traits that people who get in these relationships tend to be inherently high on with the big 5 personality traits. And so while much of it can be nurture and healing your attachment wounds from your past can be like completely transformational, sometimes it's just your personality and you just need to be taught what you are more susceptible to and what to look out for.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
And that's a big part of the treatment is that education piece.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So the big 5, did we name all 5?
No, those are just the 2 that they're highest on.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm confused. I need to take notes. Tell me, what are the other 3 then?
So the big 5 are openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism.
Eroticism.
Neuroticism.
Neuroticism.
Yeah.
Oh, we're neurotic. Oh, thanks, Dr. Sarah.
No. These are just the 5 personality traits that all humans can be on a spectrum of.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I get it. Okay, this isn't just like the 5. So this is, okay. So there are 5, and then there are 2 that we are the highest on, or we tend to have the most of, which are the
agreeableness and conscientiousness.
Thank you. Oh, that's
exactly. So yeah, this is just a way of looking.
Everybody's neurotic.
I should have explained that in the beginning.
Got it. I see.
It's just a way of looking at personality in general that psychologists have developed.
Got it. Okay. I'm with you now. Okay. So, so then we get into a relationship with these people. We're awesome. We're conscientious. Somehow this cluster B personality finds us. And then the relationship is like doing this dramatic, erratic thing. Erratic, dramatic,
Yeah.
erratic, dramatic, erratic, or
Dramatic and erratic, either or. I mean,
either.
you've got the
Okay.
two words that matter. And
Right.
that, I mean, there's different phases, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners are familiar with the phases of a narcissistic abusive relationship, but
Go through them again. We can never lay it out enough, too much.
I
So,
know. Yeah. So the first stage is love bombing, and there's
Mhm.
all this like false connection, and it's really quick. Big statements of love and commitment. They might ask up for upfront commitment to exclusivity, like right away, and they get your buy-in.
So good.
Magically, they are so similar to you, and you guys just have all the same interests and values. And isn't that weird? It's often because you've been targeted, because they can inherently sense that you're strong in these traits. And they're like, this looks like someone I could benefit from. They might do a lot of emotional labor for me, or they might give me money and I won't have to work, or they might let me live somewhere for free. So, yeah, they love bomb. Then they start to devalue you and break you down. This is where the mask might start slipping, and you might see weird things that just don't line up with all the big statements they made in the love bombing stage.
Mm-hmm.
But they start to convince you it's you, you're crazy, you're wrong, you're seeing things, you're making things up. And then they discard. And, that could be breaking up with you. That could be having a huge fight and stopping talking to you for 3 days or a week. Also, when they're discarding, they're very often love bombing somebody new. And so you're just not that valuable to them anymore.
Yes. And in the discard phase, I know that like the silent treatment is a really big, can be like a huge part of that. I mean, it's like the ultimate discarding, right? Like, I'm actually not going to give you anything. And then that's when like the breadcrumbs start, right? Because they give you the smallest little bit of attention. And then you're like, oh, it's look at this big giant cake.
That's right. And they lure you back in.
Yeah.
And hoovering is another way we talk about that. And then the whole cycle continues. And this creates this chaotic, erratic, dramatic situation where the victim is just confused, constantly confused. What is real? What is not? They often become addicted to the cycle, and the reinforcement and the reward that they get from the love bombing and the honeymooning after they get hoovered back in is addictive, and it makes it really hard to leave.
Yes, and it's that dopamine cycle, right? That we get addicted to. It's like same as cocaine, same everything is about that rush, right?
That's right.
And the thing that I always try to impress upon people is that, the cycle is the relationship, right? Because we think that first thing, that love bombing stage, we think that that's the relationship. And so we just want to get back to that. And since we always do get back to that, we're kind of like have a high tolerance for all the other shit, because like we know that at some point we're going to get back to that. And that's the thing. And we're just constantly like chasing the high of that initial connection.
Yep.
That we keep getting the intermittent reinforcement, but like that's not the relationship. That's the lie that we tell each other. We tell ourselves, right? That like, well, that's the real relationship. All this other stuff is just what we go through, but like that's the real thing. And then eventually we're going to get that high and we're going to stay there.
Yeah. That's the cognitive dissonance that so many victims of these types of relationship experience. And it's one of the biggest things we have to treat in the aftermath. The trauma symptoms and the aftermath of the relationship is helping you integrate that actually both were the relationship, and the real part of the relationship was the bad stuff.
Right.
The other stuff was manufactured to get you to stick around for the bad stuff.
And it's so, I will say, so having been through this, this is the trauma bond, right? The trauma bond is the addictive cycle. And having been through this, not with my ex-husband, but in another relationship after my divorce, I've never felt so broken. Like never. And it took longer for me to recover from that relationship than I ever took healing from my marriage. And I remember saying to my best friend once, like, I think he broke me. Like, I think he actually broke me. And she said, she was like, I think maybe he did.
Did that feel validating to hear?
It did. It did. It really did. I mean, I don't think it was ultimately true, but it really did because for a long time, people have been like, no, like, it's fine. You'll be fine. You'll be fine. I'm like, no, I think he broke me.
Yeah.
And, he didn't, but it took like a good 5 years to recover from it. Yeah.
Yes. What you're describing is one of the reasons a lot of therapists who aren't trained in helping people recover from these types of relationships fail in their treatment is they minimize how serious it was.
Yes.
And they can't really validate that broken experience. Or they don't even they don't have enough training on personality disorders to recognize that the person is recovering from a really abusive, dramatic, erratic experience and how disorienting that is. Like, yes, you feel broken. You feel very broken and embarrassed and ashamed and traumatized and also addicted and wanting that person back in some ways. It's such a twisted journey.
Because I think what it's important to acknowledge for the victim is that, like, our love for this person was really real. Like, our feelings and our love is real. Theirs may not be, certainly not in the same way that ours is, but ours is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ugh. All right, we're going to take one more break. And when we come back, we'll start talking about the healing process. Yeah? Okay, good. Okay, we're back. Before the break, we were talking about how broken these relationships can really make you feel. And so part of the treatment, now, when I was going through it, nobody was naming this for me. Yeah. And so I didn't understand what was happening. And this is like 2014, 15, right? Like, I don't think we really understood this the way that we do now.
Even now, there is not enough understanding of, in the psychological community, at least. I think actually a lot of coaches and survivors have a great understanding of how disorienting and pathological this can be.
Yep.
But the psychological community has a little bit of work to do in understanding the impact fully.
Yeah.
And then, there's a gap here, right? Because a lot of the treatments for severe attachment trauma need a licensed psychologist or somebody who's had the training to deal with that level of trauma.
Right.
Yet if they're not getting the information that we're talking about, but survivors are out there coaching and doing the best they can to validate, we just need to close that gap and for people to work together. Yeah, I know you advocate for that a lot, like have a therapist and have a coach. And this 100%. Is why.
This is why. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I will always say, have a therapist, but make sure they have advanced training in attachment, in family systems, in whatever, all of this stuff, in trauma, in abuse, and trauma and abuse, so that they actually know what you're dealing with. Because
exactly.
Your average therapist, as you said, does not.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm 15 years into my career and I just got trained in attachment focused EMDR, which is what I use to heal survivors of this, or help heal, I should say. Yeah. And, that's not something it's not something a lot of therapists come to early in their career. So it is really important to make sure somebody is trauma informed and has actual trauma training, not just I kind of understand trauma and I think I can work with this.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm obsessed and have literally watched every single episode of Law and Order SVU ever.
Oh, yes.
Because I'm so into it. But my favorite thing is this season, Liv started EMDR. And so she like, took one of the victims and was like, was like a kid and was like, and took them to her EMDR therapist to help heal the trauma from her kidnapping.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, look, God love Mariska Hargitay for just bringing this stuff to the, she's completely changed the way we understand sexual assault and all of those things. And she's using her platform to educate about trauma therapy and how we actually work with trauma in effective ways. God love her.
I didn't know that. I haven't kept up with that show. Side note, I always used to see Chris Maloney.
Chris Maloney.
Hiking at Runyon, and I'd get so fangirl.
He's so hot.
He must live right around there because he was
I
always
think he
there.
does. I think he does. Yeah. He's so stupidly hot. But I feel like, that the conversation is starting to shift. And I just, when you start seeing it on primetime television, it's like, yes, we're actually, this conversation it's happening. It's happening a lot.
Another really important conversation is that of understanding your nervous system and how to heal from, these are bottom up approaches, which is, taking your body, like your somatic experience into account and connecting your body and your mind rather than just working from the top down, which is cognitive behavioral therapy and mind-based therapy and talk therapy, which all have a great place. Like those are also important. But with trauma, you need to do bottom up for the most part. Like that is the most important part. You also need to integrate it by talking about it. But truly, you've got to heal the body's memories from the past. And that could be the recent past of the relationship or the distant past of childhood.
Because the body keeps the score.
Sure does.
Because trauma this is what was so amazing about that book, is really the way that it sort of clarified how we experience traumatic experiences, which is not intellectually. And I love, there's a section where he talks about how it's not like, it's like a photograph. It's not a photograph in the mind. It's in the nervous system. Right.
That's right.
And so, I just can you sort of talk a little bit more about that, about like why we have to connect with the body and how we access that? Like, and this is why we need a therapist who is trained in somatic healing. But how do you do that? Like, how do you know where it is and where it's living and how,
Yeah. Well, first, just to talk a little bit more about what happens, sometimes you'll be in a experience with someone and you have a bigger than normal emotional reaction. Maybe your partner forgets to get milk and then kind of brushes you off when they get home and they're like, oh yeah, I'll get it tomorrow. And you feel disregarded. And suddenly you have this emotional flashback or physical flashback sometimes where you are right back in the little kid being disregarded by their parents. And you have these huge emotions that you don't know how to regulate, because as a kid, we have huge emotions. We don't know how to regulate them. We also don't have logical thought for a lot of childhood, depending on how old you are. That develops over time. And so you just go back into this body flashback or emotional flashback. Like sometimes it can be physical sensations, sometimes it can be emotions, sometimes it can be both. But that's really dysregulating.
Yeah.
And so you've got to be able to recognize what type of dysregulated you are. There's like, you kind of have a window of tolerance, and you can either be bumped up above that where you're more anxious, angry, fight, kind of in your sympathetic nervous system, or bumped down below that and you're in your more dorsal vagal nervous system, which is, I'm tired, I'm depressed, I feel helpless, I'm collapsed, or I'm totally disconnected, not even feeling anything.
Mm-hmm. That's usually me.
Me too. Yeah, I tend to bump down more.
Yep.
Yeah. And that's actually the most dysregulated state. And to get back to regulation, you have to go through the sympathetic fight flight. So it's interesting because sometimes you might feel like you're getting worse before you get better. Because if you're used to hanging out in that dorsal collapsed, disconnected state, and then suddenly you are moving up the ladder into a more regulated state, you're going to get into that sympathetic fight flight and feel like super anxious, or like I need to do all this work and I need to just go, 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 or I need to fight, fight, fight. And it might feel like you're getting worse before you're getting better, but that is a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
and you also need a therapist who understands that and can say, no, it's okay. This is good. You're on the right path.
Right.
And you're good.
I said that to a friend of mine the other day. She's going through a really, really traumatic, awful heartbreak, and she's just been a mess. And she's like, how will I know when I'm starting to like heal? And I was like, let me know when you start to get angry.
Yep.
Because I think that'll be a good sign. And that's what I think, that I didn't really recognize it as that climbing up the ladder, but that's exactly what it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then you get into a more regulated state. This is kind of your baseline, right? We always can get dysregulated no matter how evolved we are. Like something upsets us and we get dysregulated. But in your more evolved state, you spend more time in a regulated state than a dysregulated state. So and that's great. Then you can think clearly, you can make rational decisions, you have fewer health issues. I mean, there's a lot of benefits to being in a regulated state more often than not.
It's so interesting. I just think about how, like, just as you put it that way, how dysregulated I was for so long, right? Because I didn't know, I never had any, I would say that I was like a head on legs. People would be like, how are you? And be like, I don't know. I don't know. And I really didn't. I was so perpetually dysregulated. And that was in my marriage, right? Because it wasn't really safe for me to know how I felt because for so many reasons. And I think that's how I came to the relationship, right? From my childhood trauma, just completely, there was no regulation ever. And then I think that's what makes us more susceptible, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the nurture component. And the nature component is that you have those traits.
Right.
We have those traits.
Right. Okay. So for the healing, we've got to do the somatic work. We've got to do whether it's EMDR, so in terms of like the nervous system regulation, right? It's one thing to sort of notice when you're coming up, but like, if you are in this state, this frozen state, the really like down below the line state, are there things that you can do physically to pull yourself?
Yeah. Well, physical is actually a great thing to do when you're in that dorsal below the line state. The more you can move your body and get connected to your body, the better.
Yeah.
Standing up and just shaking vigorously is silly, but it really gets you back in your body.
Yeah.
Grounding experiences can be helpful. So focusing on your 5 senses. Sometimes I have clients in session holding essential oils, and if they start to dissociate, just have a sniff of the peppermint oil and they're like back in their body immediately.
Yes.
Or holding something like a fluffy pillow or petting your dog or whatever. There's a lot of different ways to get it. Your 5 senses are obviously what you see, what you hear, what you smell, what you taste, what you touch. So doing anything to engage those will get you back in your body and a little bit higher up on the ladder.
Yeah. I always have my clients take with them a client who had to go to court for like a really, really, really like rough divorce, proceeding. And she put her water bottle in the freezer. And so she just kept this ice cold thing in her hands, and her hands were like, freezing, but it was just keeping that, it was like shocking her nervous system back. She just grabbed it. And something especially that cold, when you plunge your hands into, like if you're having a panic attack and you plunge your hands into a bowl of ice, it'll shock your nervous system back into the present, right? And that's kind of what we want in those, especially those extreme moments, right? The shock of it.
Yes. And exactly right. It'll bring you back to the present, right? Because if you're having a panic attack, a lot of times you're in a past body memory and you need in present, you're usually in a safe place, right? You may not be emotionally safe, but if you're not well, I shouldn't even say you're usually in a safe place, but if you can bring yourself back to present day as an adult, you usually have a little bit more power than you did as a kid, where you're flashing back to.
What are some questions that people should be asking when looking for a therapist? What should they be looking for, especially people who have been in this kind of relationship? They're trying to come out of it. What are they looking for in a therapist?
Are you an expert on understanding the impact of being in a relationship with someone with a personality disorder, a cluster B personality disorder? Have you worked with people coming out of relationships like this in depth? What does that work look like? What are some of the tools you might give me to help with that? What are some of the ways we might reprocess what's been going on for me? How will you help me understand what's been going on for me?
Yeah.
There's a lot of questions that I could think of, but what's your training in this area? It's hard because as a lay person, you don't always know what training they should have.
Exactly. I was going to say, what should the answer be to that?
EMDR, somatic experiencing, nervous, like polyvagal theory, nervous system training, any of those three things are great for working with attachment trauma.
Awesome. So good. Any last words of wisdom or love for our listeners?
Just that, if you've been through an experience like this, know that you have traits that make you an incredible partner and an incredible human, and the right person you'll be able to create a really great relationship with the right person.
Dr. Sarah Schewitz, thank you so much. Where can everybody find you?
They can find me on Instagram at Couples Learn, and our website is coupleslearn.com. And those are the two places I hang out the most. I have Couples Learn on every, social media handle, but mostly Instagram.
Okay. And you have your team of therapists, and how do you work with state licensure stuff? Do you have therapists in every state? How do you work this?
Mostly based in California. I'm licensed in, I think, 45 different states at this point, because as a psychologist, I get access to SciPact, which gives you reciprocity in like 43 different states. And then I have my license in California and New York as well. So we can cover a pretty broad part of the United States and then out of the country as well.
Amazing. Yeah. Coupleslearn.com, everybody. Dr. Sarah, thank you so much for sharing your immense wisdom with us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Divorce Survival Guide podcast. If you like what you hear, head on over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen in and leave me a review. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram at the Divorce Survival Guide. I'll see you next time, and until then, remember, you, my love, deserve to be happy.